Well, it's 11:01, and let us start our meeting here today. So welcome, everybody. Happy to see some of you online, and we're here at our Sunday meeting from my house, but representing the FSS, the Fraternity Spiritus Society of Calgary, and we're happy to be here to share an hour with you to talk a little bit about Jesus, about Spiritism, and about God. And we usually start with harmonization text. And today's text is from uh, Emmanuel in a book called Courage from Shiku Xavier through Spirit Emmanuel. And you can see, I'll be projecting it on the video, the text, if you want to follow along, or you can just close your eyes and listen to the text. Again, it's just to harmonize ourselves here. So the text is titled To Free Us. Emmanuel says, laziness keeps the head unoccupied and the hands in idle. Unoccupied hands and idled hands encounter disorder. Disorder falls into time without discipline. Time without discipline goes to vigilance, invigilance. The invigilance sponsors the conversation without meaning. Conversation without meaning weaves the shadows of blindness of spirit. The blindness of spirit promotes imbalance. Imbalance attracts pride. Pride fuels vanity, and vanity aggravates laziness. As it is easy to see, laziness is likely to trigger all evils, in which darkness is capable of inducing all errors. We understand, therefore, that obsession, madness, pessimism, delinquency, or illness can appear due to authentic fertilizations of idleness, intoxicating the mind and ruining life. And let us now recognize that the first step to free ourselves from inertia will always be to work. So let us join in prayer. Let's close our eyes, take a deep breath, elevate our thoughts, our mind, our hearts to our Creator, who not only created us, but created everything around us, allowing us to be here today, to learn a little bit more about our own self. Elevating our thoughts to our model and guide, our Jesus Christ, who so humbly brought us the example of love in everything and everyone. And elevating our thoughts and thanking our guardian angels for helping us to be here today, giving us the intuition or the idea that some time spent with Jesus is always well worthwhile. And we ask that please here today we're able to, with a lot of humility, share some of the words that Jesus shared with us so long ago and still share with us daily. Help us understand and open our hearts to truly absorb this balm of knowledge, of feeling, and of love that Jesus spreads around day in and day out. So be it. Thank you and welcome. everybody. We just finished our prayer and our harmonization text, so we can now start our talk for the day. And the title is Have I Been Feeling an Emptiness Inside? And this came from a seminar from the Federation of the State of the Spiritist Federation of the state of Mato Grosso in Brazil, who in 2016 did a seminar with talks about the therapeutic invitations from Jesus. And the seminar had roughly 9 talks, and I'll be specifically talking about 2 of them. One is Invitation to Forgiveness by La Cordera Brown Fayad, and the second one is Invitation to Self-Improvement by Afro Stefanini II, or the second. Now these 2 fellows, they are, the way they speak is like you're listening to poetry. So I can tell you now that I will not do it justice. And I highly invite you, if you do speak Portuguese, you can go on YouTube and find all these at their channel. And they do speak like poetry, so it is quite nice to listen to them talk about all of this. But without further ado, we'll start with an inner reflection, as we always do. So we can close our eyes, and I'll pose 3 questions to you, and hopefully you can absorb them and answer them inside within our own thoughts. So the first one is, do I feel an emptiness inside? If I don't, have I felt it before? And it's not something constant, but sometimes throughout the day or throughout some periods of time. The second one is, do I know why I feel empty inside? Do I know what generates this emptiness? And the last one is, am I aware of my potential to develop love or to fill up this emptiness that I have inside? Like the emptiness, like an empty cup. Do I know that I have the potential to constantly fill it up and move away from this emptiness? So to start, we're just asking the question, have we suffered before? Are we suffering now? And when we think about Spiritism, it was able to bring us the immortality of the soul, the understanding of the immortality of the soul, which has come to show us that there is life beyond suffering. We now can know what happened in the past. We know what's happening now, and we know what might happen in the future. We can understand why we're here today, where we came from, and where we might be going to. This all can bring us a sense of belonging that's very important in this journey of filling up that emptiness that we have inside. Now, the fact is that even though we know all of this, a lot of times we still feel emptiness. We still suffer, right? And it's a suffering that can get to different levels, to the point where it's like we're handcuffed and our strength is gone. We have no more strength, or we lose hope. Our lives become something quite heavy, and we interpret all our experiences as punishment. And in this house of time, where time doesn't go by, we see life being an adversary to us. We're thinking that everybody and everyone around us is out to get us. Our families, our friends, our work, our bosses, and everybody around us, they're trying to get us. They're trying to make us suffer. Right? We're hitting a suffering that's what we call sometimes rock bottom. And that is one of the triggers of this feeling of emptiness inside. It's like there is no more meaning to it. And so this existential emptiness, what we call, is the distancing from our own self and from God, right? When I no longer see the purpose in life, or I don't see the purpose of this thing that I'm going through, I'm distancing myself from me. And I'm distancing myself from God. And Allan Kardec asked us the first question in the Spirit's book. He asked, what is God? Instead of who's God? And it's really interesting that today or yesterday was the anniversary of the Spirit's book, which was the first in the decodification of Allan Kardec, and it marks 163 years, if I'm not mistaken, yesterday. So I thought it'd be nice to bring the very first question of that book. So, and I want to focus on the actual question, right? Kardec asked, who is God? And not what is God? Or sorry, Kardec asked, what is God? Not who is God? Because when we ask who is God, it's as if we're trying to humanize God. We're trying to create God from our notion of being humans. Instead, Kardec asked, what is God? What is it? So he wasn't trying to humanize it, to make it something that's similar to us. And so much so that when we have this idea of humanizing God, of thinking that God is somewhat similar to us, so we start to picture it as a person, or how it was pictured many years ago, and still is sometimes. God is somebody sitting on a throne, right? On a throne that is constantly watching us, knowing exactly everything that we do, and if it's constantly spying on us, and as soon as we make a mistake, it's ready to punish us. And it gets tough because God can not only see our actions, but also know our feelings, know our thoughts, right? So there is no hiding. So when we have this idea that that God is not just love, but it also wants to punish the things that we've done bad, this generates a huge fear towards God. And when we fear something, it's really tough to love it. When we fear God, we actually will want to run away from God. So instead of this fear, this notion, instead of motivating us to know God, to feel God, and to experience God by understanding that we are sons and daughters of God, instead we've been caught up in the theology that fear God is the way to go, and that has caused humanity to divert away from God quite substantially, up to when we get to the 17th century in Europe, when we were going through that phase of enlightenment. And at one point it got us to completely sever our relationship with God, to realize the science was everything and we didn't need God anymore. We already had everything. And this distancing that we talked about, which can cause this existential emptiness, it got to culminate in the Second World War, as we see, when a whole race was to be exterminated. So this disconnect from God, this emptiness inside, caused so many atrocities around the globe. And in the Second World War, he created concentration camps in Auschwitz. And it was there that a fellow named Victor Frankl was thinking to himself and trying to understand what was going on, but not just around us or around himself, but what was going within him. And he did go through something very painful and a lot of suffering, but there's something that he noticed in a lot of them that was around him. and he was the faith in life. So when Viktor Frankl arrived in Auschwitz, he was on the train and he saw the prisoners coming in, and they were dressed in that uniform, but they were still alive. They were still walking. They were still walking to the train. So as he left the train, Victor got undressed and got put on this uniform, got his head shaved, all his documents stripped from him, and a number attached to him. So at that point, he lost all his identity. Right? They stripped all his identity from him as if he was no longer human. And he says that in that time, he was losing hope, and even his loving memories from the past were starting to fade, to the point that he got really numb to the things around him, to the point that when he was leaving the concentration camp, the guards would sometimes bring them to an electric fence that was outside, and the guards would tell them, touch it, you're no longer human, end the suffering now, touch that fence. But he didn't. And he noticed that a lot of them in there didn't either. They were suffering like very few people have, and yet they didn't want to extinguish their life. They didn't touch it. They still had this power within them. And Victor, who was a psychiatrist, and his focus was what we call the existential therapy, right? That tells us that there is something within us. There is a strength within us that's indestructible, and it maintains society alive. And Joanna de Angelis, who was the spirit mentor of Medium Divaldo Pereira Franco, she told us that there is a Samaritan inside of us, because we are sons of light. We have a light, a potential within us that never ceases to exist. We might not see it, we might sometimes try to hide it, but it's always there. And we can see this in her book that she entitled Rejoice in God, Joanna de Angelis. Rejoice in God. So instead of fearing God, let us rejoice in God. And she goes on to tell us about the mistakes that we make, where the mistakes, the unfortunate attitudes and actions that we cause, they're not evil, but they're wrong movements, and they can teach us how not to behave. They stiffen our character, and they can sweeten our hearts. And these two, with this improved character, it encourages us to search for uplifting goals and correct our behaviors, while the sweetened heart acts through the patience and compassion towards all of those, including ourselves, who do not share the same attitude, as it is a personal and untransferable movement. Right? So this movement of learning from our mistakes and rejoicing in them as personal and untransferable. We can't ask anybody to do it for us, but once we do, it's a sign that we are rejoicing in God. We're no longer fearing that God. So it's a great sign of improvement that we can see. So Lacordaire, he brings us three movements that we go through, from egoic movements, if you will, that keep us in that fear of God, that doesn't allow us to transform it to a virtue and help us rejoice in God. So we'll look at two different egoic movements, and then we'll look at the essential movement, the movement that's loving and that's not egoic. And to illustrate this, we can think of when somebody did something to us. So if we're going through the reactive egoic movement that he calls it, which is not real, he's telling us that that's the manifest pride. So this is the person, or those are the people, or us, who manifests that pride. That pride can be seen. It's not hidden. It's out there. And the question that we usually goes through our minds when somebody does something to us is, how dare you do this to me? Right? And then when we reflect, we're thinking, they couldn't have done this to me. I do everything for them, and I get this in return. So we can see through these movements that this is generating feelings of hatred, of heartache, of resentment, of rage, and sometimes of hate. And these feelings, as we can see, they are not pure. They're not loving feelings, right? They're all instilled in that ignorance, in our ego. And so all these feelings, we say that they fuel our existential emptiness, because these feelings are not helping us love ourselves. They're not helping us get closer to myself and to God. Instead, they're distancing us from us and from God. So it generates this existential emptiness that we feel inside. On the other side of the spectrum, so we have the manifest pride. On the other side of the spectrum, we have the passive egoic movement that we call it the masked pride. So that's the pride that has a mask over it that we're trying to hide, right? We're not trying to show it, instead we're trying to hide. So in the same movement, if you will, when somebody does something to us, we're thinking, I forgive that person because they don't deserve that I be resentful. So in this movement, we're seeing that I'm annulling myself. And I'm saying I'm going to forgive because of them, not because of myself. Further to that, we can see that the same thoughts that would come by is, oh, I really deserved it. Or, poor them, they did this to me. Or, poor them, that they are so sick that they start offending people all over the place. So poor them, right? We're starting to pity those people. In this movement, we say it's an egoic movement because, again, it's not bringing us essential virtues. Instead, it's bringing us masked egoic movements such as the pseudo-superiority, the self-annulment, and the pseudo-forgiveness. So the pseudo-superiority, that's when I pity people, right? I look down on them, I'll poor them, let me do something. Right? So it's that pseudo-superiority, which is a very comfortable sometimes place to be when you think you're better than others. The self-annulment, at the same time, is the complete opposite. Annulling myself, thinking that I don't deserve anything. And the pseudo-forgiveness, which is when I forgive others so they don't feel bad. Right? I'm not forgiving it because of my own self. So again, they're all external movements, right? They're, every action that I'm taking here is because of others, of how others feel or how I want to make others feel. And again, this fuels an existential emptiness, right? Because these three feelings that we talked about, they're not essential, right? We're moving away from ourselves by instilling these feelings within me, because it's preventing me from developing my own self-love. So the invitation, or the proactive movement that we call, is through courage, basically acting with love, right? Not trying to hide our ego, and not trying to exacerbate that ego, but acting through love. And that movement, which we call the proactive essential movement, if we were to follow the exact same steps, right, we would first react with humility. When I realize that I'm aware that what that person did to me awoke or has arisen or arose my own heartache, and I'm capable of freeing myself from the resentment through forgiveness, right? So here is realizing, and this is something, this is an invitation that can help a lot with our self-awareness. It's realizing that what other people are doing to us, the feeling that we get as a reaction, it's not because of their action, but it's because of something that's already within myself. Right? If I have rage within myself, people will only trigger it to show up. But that's not because of them, it's because I have that anger within me. Once I've been able to transform all that anger into love, then no matter what people do to me and around me, I won't feel angry. I will be able to express that love. And Jesus is our great example of that being done, who showed love in everything that he did. And then another reflection, if we go deeper here, is when I realize, like I said, the limitations that I have caused me heartache, right? But I can transform them into opportunities for self-growth, right? So when I realize that I'm feeling heartache, or I'm feeling hatred, or whatever that feeling is, when I realize that's because I carry those matrices, or I carry those inclinations, and then I see that opportunity, instead of fixating in this feeling, in this bad feeling, I fixate on the fact that I can utilize that opportunity, that exact feeling, for self-growth, right? Through understanding that I have that feeling within me, I have that heartache within me, I have that anger within me, welcoming it by understanding that it's okay to feel that, right? It's part of myself. Once I realize that it's part of myself, I can start to love it, and I can start to understand then why I felt it and what I should be doing to transform it. But it always starts with that humility or that compassion towards our own self, right? So again, this movement, it promotes an essential feeling, or a couple essential feelings, such as self-love and forgiveness. And so these are no longer egoic feelings, but now essential feelings that brings us closer to us, because this whole movement that we talked about is fueling our self-awareness. We're starting to understand who we are. We're understanding to accept who we are. So we're getting close to us, and in return close to God, right? So this would promote an existential sense, or an existential awareness, right? So you have the existential emptiness, and now we have the existential sense, or the existential awareness. And we can see how we can get from one to the other now. And one of the important movements, if you will, that we go through is the faith. It's faith. One of them being faith in me. And Lacordaire, he tells us that God didn't create anybody lacking. So we are not needy, affectionate, from an affectionate sense. We're not deprived of values, right? We're not lacking anything. Why? Because we can see that in John chapter 14, where Jesus told us, "Very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works that I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these." Right? So this is telling us that there is a Christ within us. It's an invitation for us to awaken that Christ. Have faith in ourselves that we have that potential to overcome whatever it is that we're going through. by awakening that inner Christ, because Christ himself told us that we can do everything that he did. Joanna de Angelis, she tells us in the book Son of God that there is a Christ as a sun within us. So our jobs is to let it shine, right? To work towards it, letting it shine. And here's when Lacordaire tells us about the story of the prostitute in John chapter 8. And I think most of you are aware, but this is the time when the prostitute is thrown at the square by the Pharisees, and everybody's ready to start stoning her. And then Jesus says, or the Pharisees ask Jesus, so what do you tell to that lady? And Jesus, instead of saying whether it was right or whether it was wrong, he said, who's never sinned before, be the first one to cast the stone. And he started writing the sins of the Pharisees on the sand, and they all left. Right? So they realized they all had done, they have all made mistakes before, so they are not allowed to throw or to cast a stone, to judge her, because they themselves are also beings that make mistakes. And then Jesus got to her and told her, look around you. Did anybody condemn you? And then she looked around and there was nobody else there. She said, no, nobody condemned me. And Jesus told her, well, nobody condemned you. I don't condemn you either. And then he told her, go and sin no more. So Amelia Rodriguez, through Spirit, through Develop Pereira Franco, Spirit Amelia Rodriguez in the book Permits to Kingdom, talks about this prostitute in this scene, and tells a huge story about it, but I'll just focus on the fact that Amelia told us that this lady was very needy, was feeling very needy, and that's why she went through what she did. And it's very interesting for us to reflect that this neediness that we constantly sometimes have comes from our own lack of love towards ourselves, which is fruit of our ignorance, of our ego. Right? So our own self-love is what's showing here. Right? This neediness that we have, because we don't love ourselves, we feel deprived of love, and then we go and try to seek love on the outside when truly we're just missing love from our own self. So the mask, the mask that Jesus was aiming at removing from that time with this lady, Lacordaire tells us that this was the mask of the Puritanism, realizing that we are not pure, we're not perfect yet, and it's really important for us to welcome us the way we are, with our difficulties, with our bad inclinations. And that's crucial for us to start developed faith in me. And if I don't know myself, if I don't accept myself, how can I trust myself? So that's a big invitation to develop our faith within ourselves. It's really interesting that Jesus was able in his encounters to touch people's hearts and to make them actually, or to motivate that change in them. And that was one of the major reasons that happened, is that because he was always speaking to the soul of that person, to the potential of that person. He always saw the potential in everybody. He was never pitting somebody. Instead, he was looking and understanding and seeing the potential in everybody and speaking to that. Right? So when he said, go and sin no more, she actually did, because she must have felt that potential, that power within her being awakened. And since we're talking about this change. We can't talk about change without bringing the law of progress, which also talks about our right and our duty to happiness. Right? When we say go and sin no more, right? That is a prelude to this law of progress, to the right and the duty of being happy. Right? We have the right to be happy and the duty, because as we improve, as we come closer to happiness, we're also helping others around us through our example to find that as well. But again, it starts within us, right? And sometimes we can stomp our feet and say, no, I don't want to be happy, or I don't want to progress, I want to stay where I am, and that's perfectly fine. Right? We all have our free will, and we're allowed to do that. But it gets to a point where suffering reaches such a deep level that we say no more. Right? Now I want to actually to go and seek that happiness and seek that progress. Right? And this is the law of cause and effect working its beauty. We still have sometimes the notion that the law of cause and effect comes from that God that's punishing us, or that God that we fear, when instead the law of cause and effect is so beautifully crafted by the omnipotence, by the omniscience, and by the omnipresence of God, that through his mercy gifts us with all of these things that we go through, with the sole purpose of protecting us from ourselves, to help us realize, perhaps you shouldn't be doing this. Why don't you learn from this and do it in a different way? So when we go through that rabbit hole of making mistakes after mistakes after mistakes, and distancing ourselves from us, God's mercy has ways that he puts in front of our lives as an invitation from us to come out of it. And that instills my merit. Right? And that fuels my faith in me, because I start to realize that yes, I can. Yes, I can. And this brings us to talk about our existential feeling. Eric's sharing with us a good post here, when he's telling us that the Spirit Emmanuel tells us in the book Monte Sima. There's no translation yet, but you can think of it as the hill above. Many companions on earth show courage in the hours of heroism. However, the courage of faith will always be more difficult, because it requires humility and renunciations, tolerance and dedication to the good of others in the incessant unfolding of the daily lives. Thank you for sharing with us, Eric, and this is certainly something that that fits within what we're talking about here, that faith in me. And we'll talk a little bit more about faith in God and faith in life, but it requires, like Eric mentioned here, the humility and the renunciation, the tolerance and the dedication constantly towards ourselves and towards others, to finally fulfill the act, or the act of love, which is what the courage is, acting with love in everything that we do. So when we think about the existential feeling, this was Alfred talking about this, when he said that nobody is empty. Now we just started this talk talking about, do I feel an emptiness inside? And now we're saying that nobody's empty. Well, how does that work? Well, nobody's empty because we're all sons and daughters of God. Right? We all will have that divine essence within us. We are never empty. So what causes that emptiness that we feel? That emptiness that we feel is caused by the meaning that we give to our lives, the meaning that we give to the actions that we do. Right? And And this emptiness that we were talking about, Allan Kardec in the Spirit's book also was reflecting about this. To the point that in question 943 he asked, where does this dissatisfaction with life come from, which takes hold of some individuals without any plausible reason? This is the area of the book when he starts talking about suicide. And the answer is, it is the effect of idleness, lack of faith, and usually satiety. Satiety in Portuguese is saciedade, or satiety in English is when we're just trying to basically overflow what we're doing to our passions. And I'll explain that in a little bit. But I just wanted to bring forward that the effect of idleness, the lack of faith, and satiety, that's what we talked a little bit about in the harmonization text from the very beginning, that comes from the book Courage, that Shiku wrote through inspiration of Spirit Emmanuel. Right? So you can see how the courage actually that even Eric mentioned here is connected to this lack of faith, to this idleness, and to this satiety that we'll talk a little bit more about now. So what is this satiety that we talked about? Is, again, everything that we do to fulfill the sensories around us, our passions, such as eating a lot, drinking a lot, and so on and so forth, the adrenaline a lot. And when we focus on this mad, if you will, rush to fulfill all of these passions, we're doing that to hide our own feelings. We're inhibiting our own feelings by going on this path of passions. For example, when I start feeling anxious, right, instead of dealing with that anxiety, what do? I go and eat a lot, I go and drink a lot, and go and jump off a plane to rush that adrenaline, and so on and so forth, right? So there are many things that we're doing from the outside, trying to hide that feeling on the inside. The idleness that we talk about, that Allan Kardec talks about here, idleness, we think about lack of action, right? That we're just sitting and not doing anything. But Afra actually brings us a different view on idleness, where he's saying that idleness can too be when we're doing a lot of things, right? We're going to church or to the Spirit Center every day, and we're doing a lot of things, we're doing a lot of volunteering, and that's amazing. But what is the purpose that I'm giving to all of that? Am I doing all of that to make me a better person? Or am I doing all that so others see me as a good person, right? And that fills the void that I'm having inside. I'm trying to basically contract out my self-love. So instead of me working towards my self-love, I'm building this image so others love me, and I try to fulfill my emptiness with others loving me. But we know that self-love, this emptiness that we feel inside, fulfilling our existential purpose, is intransferable. We can't transfer, we cannot contract it out. I mean, this is us loving who we truly are. And the lack of faith is, again, very in line with that, right? When, again, we're doing and forgetting why we're doing it. What is this trying to teach me? When I'm, again, putting everything that I'm doing to build an image, relying on others to make me feel better, I lose the faith in me. I lose the potential in me because I think that I'm not capable of loving myself. So I'm trying to get others to do that for me. Right? So we can see that in this dissatisfaction with life. These are all the movements that we go through that cause this dissatisfaction. And going back to Viktor Frankl, in that concentration camp, he comes out and he shares with the entire world his reflection, going against the idea that it is the environment that changes us or that shapes us, and saying that we are the ones that have the potential to change ourselves through the experiences from the outside, where the outside does not dictate who we truly are. And in that moment, he was giving us a great example, an example that was researched, that was lived, and it was proved by him, of a passage from Jesus that tells us that you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. And he ends with, and he goes forward to say, you are the light of the world. So when we're thinking about these two attributes that Jesus told us about ourselves, you are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world. Right? These are two very powerful attributes of meaning. Right? The salt of the earth and the light of the world. And this is showing that this meaning that we're deprived when we have this emptiness is produced by us. And because we produce this emptiness, we are the ones in charge of fulfilling it. Right? And in the Spirits book, in the introduction, Kardec tells us that spirits are the intelligent agents of the universe. We're one of the potentials of nature. We are the ones who produce the meaning of our own lives. And that is the saltiness of salt, is the essence of salt. When we, like Jesus is saying here, if the salt loses its salt, if the salt loses its saltiness, so if salt loses its essence, it's no longer good. It can be thrown away. And that's exactly the feeling that we have once we lose the meaning of life. Same way the salt loses its meaning. When our lives, when we lose our meaning in life, what we want to do after that is to throw our life away. And that's what we see through the depression, through suicide. Right? So reinstating this meaning to our lives. Understanding we are the light of the world. We have a divine essence within ourselves that strengthens us, that gives us the potential to be better. So this content towards life that we can see is caused by us, not by the environment. So much so that we can go back to Victor Frankl and himself and all the others in Auschwitz. They were suffering, physical suffering, suffering. The environment around them were causing them to suffer, yet they never gave up. They had nothing else, and they still didn't give up. Right? They still didn't lose their saltiness. They still didn't lose their essence. And nowadays we see so many of us being able to fulfill all that satiety that we talked about, all those passions. We're fulfilling it with food, with drugs, with alcohol, with sex, with adventures, and so on and so forth. And even when we have all of this, we still fall into depression. We still fall into suicide. Right? So is it the things that are needed for us to fill that emptiness inside? Or is it us? Right? So that's a good reflection that we can put forward. So when we talk about, after then describes the attributes within us, just to give a little bit of a sense of our potential. When Jesus tells us, be perfect, like your Father is perfect. Just a bit of reflection here. We can't be perfect as God is perfect. but we can be relative. We can reach relative. We can become perfect in a relative sense of speaking, where we can improve and we can perfect the attributes that God created us with. So when we talk about the divine attributes that we talk about on our studies on Monday nights, a few of them are that God is eternal, is omnipotent, and is omniscient. And if we're trying to apply and perfect these attributes within us, we can think about the eternal. So God is eternal. I am not eternal. So I can't develop this. I can't perfect the feeling of being eternal, but I am immortal. And through understanding this feeling of being an immortal spirit, understanding that I came from somewhere, that I am here for a reason, right? There is a purpose to all this. And then when I go, I'm not going to end. I'm just going to basically change my clothes and go to a different place. It gives us a notion of belonging, right? When we look at the attribute of God being omnipotent, am I omnipotent? No, I'm not, but I'm potent. Meaning I have the potential within myself to transform myself. And when I'm thinking about the attribute of omniscience from God, I'm not omniscient, but I do carry my awareness. I do carry the ability to get to know myself, to understand who I am, to be aware of myself, right? Which is something that God has given us. And the invitation that we go through and that Afro brings us is that we realize that through centuries and millennia that we've gone through, we're here today, right? And we're not damned and we're not glorified. We are who we managed to be. We're not terrible. We're not amazing. We are what we managed to be because of our actions from the past, right? And an act of self-love towards us, self-love, is to accept that, right? Accept that we are here the way we are. And then you can ask, well, so does that mean we don't need to improve? Absolutely not. There's a lot of things that we're invited to improve on a daily basis. But again, accepting that we are here now because of our choices and our actions is really crucial. And Afro provides us a reflection about Jesus, how Jesus has changed the world from a history perspective where things are now before Christ or after Christ. But Afro was saying that Jesus also changed the energy of love on earth by coming here. So he was saying that love is something that was understood by the philosophers, especially from Greece, before that studied a lot what love was. The souls of the Orient were able to feel that love, which is what the existential therapy from Victor Frankl also brings, is that feeling of love. But it wasn't until Jesus came to earth that we had the testament of love, that we were able to see love expressed in every action, in every footstep. So this brings us to the three ways or the three ideas that we go through when trying to develop our virtues. Right? First is comprehending, understanding, making it understandable, thinking about it. It makes sense, right? That virtue makes sense. For example, love. Then we go through the feeling, right? Through the reflection of that understanding, we're able to feel that within our hearts. And then with Jesus' amazing testament is when we can actually go and give ourselves to that experience and live it within our lives. So this is when I'm able to put myself available towards all my experiences, truly going through them. I start filling my emptiness with love. So I'm giving meaning to everything that I do in life. Right? Every experience I go through, I don't try to rebel against it. No, I go forward with it with courage. Right? Acting with love, giving a meaning to that experience so it can start filling my emptiness. I have a couple more slides. And when we go to Matthew chapter 5, this is the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus tells us, if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And after it describes something that's on the movie called Gandhi, which describes when Mahatma Gandhi and priest Charles Andrews were together in Africa, and they were talking and walking down a path, and they saw a lot of Caucasian Englishmen, and they started to harass Gandhi verbally. And Andrew said, well, we should turn around and go away, right? I think it's safer that way. And Gandhi looked at Andrews and said, why don't we do what Jesus taught you, what your master taught you? If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. Right? And in this moment, Gandhi was telling him that, yes, we do have an energy within us, or we do have something, ignorance within us that leads us to sometimes organize a force of violence, a force of terror that's sometimes very intense. But at the same time, we also have that other essential feeling of acceptance, of welcoming, right? Of never fighting back. And the teaching with all this is that Gandhi was saying that the bully only exists when there's somebody that fears them. If nobody else fears them, the bully dissolves. So even though we have this energy that's trying to instill fear on us, right? The God that we fear, that's only there because part of us is caving. Part of us is letting it work, let it take the best out of us. So understanding that we have that potential in us to welcome ourselves, not to fear, but to have faith in ourselves. Right? When we have faith in ourselves, when we accept ourselves, realize that there's nothing to fear because we're okay with who we are already. Right? Then that instills our faith in life, where we realize that everything that we go through is for our own benefit, and that too trumps faith in God, that we're no longer fearing God, but we know as sons and daughters of God that God does want the best of us, and through His mercy we're able to reach our happiness. And I want to end with a couple notes from Afro when he was ending his talk as well, and he said that if there is joy that we can live today on earth, it's a joy that is indefensible, indestructible, and undiminishable. It is the joy of living with Jesus triumphing within us. At that point, when we can internally within our soul truly say this poem that Afro used at the end. God, Father of those who cry, who are sad, who are oppressed, the fortress to the defeated, the comfort to all distressed. In the bitter misery of the tears from our mistakes, to your love we cry out. In the most tormented night, our generous spring is the good that will never dry out. In all, you are the eternal peace, our door to hope that will never close out. So thank you all for watching. I hope this faith in ourselves, in God, and in our lives can help us try to slowly fulfill that emptiness that we have inside. God, Eric is reminding us of a passage from Jesus that's really beautiful that talks about faith as well, talking about the power of faith when he says that if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Again, it's showing the potential that we have within us. Thank you all for watching. If you do have any questions, I don't think I see anything else. But again, thank you for watching, and hopefully we're able to be touched, or at least get a mustard seed within us. So thank you all, and we meet again tomorrow at night. Our 7 o'clock, we have our Monday meeting, which is in Portuguese, and we invite you all to come or to watch that online. And then at 8 o'clock, we also have tomorrow at 8 o'clock, we have in Portuguese a study as well, a reflective study. So thank you all for watching, and I'm just going to end in a quick prayer here. So let us close our eyes and really hear this crying out to God, saying, God, you're the Father of those who cry, who are sad, and who are oppressed. You are the fortress to the defeated. You are the comfort to all stressed. In the bitter misery of the tears from our mistakes, to your love we cry out. In the most tormented night, our generous spring is the good that will never dry out. In all, you are the eternal peace, our door to hope that will never close out. May God be with us today, now, forever and ever. So be it. Thank you all, and I'll see you later on Monday, hopefully.